Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We are here. College football is starting. Regardless of what you think about week 0, it's here. So make sure you tune in to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast every week, Mondays and Thursdays. Like and subscribe. Hey guys, I've got a goal. I'm at 228 subscribers on YouTube. Let's get that thing to 300 by the end of the month. All right. Make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Spotify. The podcast is doing great. You guys are awesome. Please stay tuned. I'm really excited. I'm starting picks. I'm hoping to get some guests on here from the College Huddle and hopefully beyond the College Huddle. It's an exciting time. I'm not doing any week 0 picks though, because there's no Big Ten games. I'm not going to deal with that, but I do want to talk about playoff predictions, Heisman winner, and my Heisman finalists, offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year in the Big Ten, and coach of the year, and I'll do freshman of the year as well. If you caught the Big Ten huddle with me on it, we did a version of this, but I'm going to maybe talk a little bit more about why I think things will go the way they will go. Let me start because I think that my playoff predictions will help set the table. So you guys know I did my game by game analysis, who I think is going to be in the Big Ten championship game. I have Ohio State, Michigan in the Big Ten title game. That was consistent with what JR and I picked on the Big Ten huddle, even though there were a few differences because we had to agree together on that. That was the exercise we had. But we agreed Ohio State, Michigan. That's no slight to Oregon. I think Oregon has a really good shot to get there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But without further ado, let me go through my playoff predictions. I'm doing the 12-team bracket, and I know what you're thinking. I know as soon as I say a couple of teams, you're gonna be like, "There's no way they're gonna make this." And there's one team that you're gonna say, "You said on your your other podcast they weren't gonna be in it." And then I went through schedules and I went through what do I think is gonna happen, and I changed my mind because I'm allowed to do that. By the way, aside from week 1, I will change my mind on certain games, FYI. So don't get mad at me and be like, I have the receipt of you picking this. That's preseason, right? I'm allowed to change my mind. Okay. Now that we're good, let's just go on to predictions. Number 1 seed of the playoff, I have the Georgia Bulldogs because let's be honest, aside from Ohio State, they easily have the best roster in college football. Now, there are some that think that their roster is not as good as maybe people think. And, I was looking at their roster, looking at their schedule. Their schedule is really, really hard, right? Georgia has a very difficult schedule. And because of that, I think Texas is a trendy pick. They get Clemson in Atlanta. It's kind of a home game, even though it's technically a neutral site. They have to go to Kentucky. They have to go to Alabama. And by the way, Alabama's on a bye, although Georgia's also on a bye. They have to go to Texas. So the road slate is tough. They have to go to Ole Miss. Here's the deal. I think they're better than all those teams. Right? They have 7 starters each on coming back on offense and defense. I think they have the best quarterback in the country in Carson Beck. Yes, they do have to replace a number of playmakers. Obviously, the tight end. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name right now. They lose Brock Bowers. How could I forget Brock Bowers? But they also lose Ladd McConkey. That's a big deal. I do think they're high on the tight ends that they have. Clearly, it's not going to be Brock Bowers. But I think Oscar Delp, they're really high on. I think their offensive line and their defensive line, that's where I'm like, You've got a quarterback, you've got really strong line play. I think that's really good. And so I look at the roster, I look at the roster and I look at their opponents. And yes, I think Texas is really good. I think Texas beats Michigan week 2. I am concerned about Texas's defensive line. I am concerned about that, and I think if you have a really good offensive line, I think that is something that they can exploit, and I think that's where Georgia wins that game. And I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Road games are hard, but defense and running games travel everywhere. That's what Georgia has. And then you've got a quarterback who can make you pay. So I like the Bulldogs. I think they'll drop one, and it might be to Texas. But ultimately, I think they win the SEC championship game. I think if they're 12-1 and win the SEC, they're going to be the top overall seed because of the schedule, and I think because of the hype. I think they will be the number 1 seed. So that's who I have at number 1. Number 2, the Big Ten champs. You better be the Big Ten champs. I'm talking about the Ohio State University. We've talked about them at length, so I won't talk about them too much here. But I do think they go 11-1. I think they lose to Oregon at Autzen, and then I think they win the rest of their games. I think they beat Michigan twice, which I think will be very, very hard for them. I just think their roster it's so strong, and I think they have addressed the one area in their on their team that is necessary for them to address to beat Michigan, which is the running game. I think they will be able to run the ball. Again, I think by the end of the season, they might be the best run team in the country. So I've got them as the number 2 seed in the playoff. Number 3 seed might be a little controversial. I have the Florida State Seminoles. They get revenge for being left out a year ago. I think Florida State is in better shape than Clemson. I don't really buy the quarterback. I know Cade Klubnik was a, big time recruit, had a decent season a year ago, but he has not been, he has not been all world. I think people are counting on him to make a jump. I'm not sure I'm there. I think Phil Maffa as a running back is fine. I don't think their defense is going to be great. I think their linebackers I think are going to be really good. Their defensive line, you've got 3 new starters. They're just not the same as when they were, back when they had that generational defensive line. And I think Florida State, while they don't have a lot of guys coming back, I like DJ Uiagalelei. I know people will say, well, you like him more than Cade Klubnik? He got benched for Cade Klubnik. And I get that, but I think his ability to throw and run, and I like the fact that they have 4 guys coming back on the offensive line. One of them's coming from Florida and Richie Leonard. I like the defense. And I just think that Norvell, I think, has surpassed Dabo Sweeney as a coach. Then I think you look at Florida State's schedule. Their big road games are at SMU, which we'll talk about. They play Clemson at home. They go to Miami. I think Miami is getting way too much hype. I think Cam Ward is not. I don't think he's as good as people think he is. They do go to Notre Dame, which I think they could absolutely lose that game. But I think ultimately they are either 11-1 or 10-2, and I think they win. I think they win that game, or I think they win the conference and they get the 3 seed. The 4 seed is Utah. I think Utah is. A lot of people are talking about how the Big 12 is going to be very competitive. I think Utah is going to run the conference. I think Utah has the best quarterback. or the most experienced quarterback, and I think that's going to do wonders for them. You look at the schedule, and it's it's tough, but it's doable, right? They have to go to Oklahoma State. They play Arizona at home, but I think Arizona is going to be a little bit of a shell of themselves. I know that the quarterback is going to be lights out, but without Jed Fish, without some of those key guys, they go to Arizona State. I don't think that will be that hard of a game. They go to Houston again. I don't think that's going to be that hard of a game for them. I really like Utah. I would not be surprised if they ran the table with the schedule. I'll say they lose one, but I think ultimately they win the Big 12 and they get the 4 seed. The 5 seed, I have Texas. I think they get the first at large bid because of schedule. I think the win against Michigan is going to loom large in that. I think they end up having either 1 or 2 losses. I think they'll be in the SEC championship game. I think they'll lose that. That's where, so either they're 10-2 going into that or 11-1 going into that. And then they lose the SEC championship game. They're the 5 seed. Michigan is my 6 seed at 10-3. And I don't think they get penalized for losing to Ohio State a second time. I think they will get credit for having a tough out of conference game with Texas. I think they get credit for beating Oregon. And I think they get, credit for beating USC. And their losses will be 2 times to Ohio State and once to Texas. I think that's a really good resume for them to get the 6th spot. And I think it'll be better than anybody else, including the team they beat in the regular season, the Oregon Ducks, who I have at number 7. I think Oregon gets in at number 7. And I think that they are you guys know what I think of them. I think they beat Ohio State. I think that gives them immediate credibility. They lose at Michigan, which is makes a lot of sense. They're going to be a good team. Not going to knock them from their playoff resume. And the loss at Wisconsin that I have them projected to get, I don't think that knocks them too much because of the win against Ohio State and because the other wins they're going to have. So I have them at the number 7 spot. Number 8 spot, I have Alabama. I think Alabama is I think a lot of people are projecting the fall because of the loss of Nick Saban. I think they're still going to be really good. I think Jalen Milroe might be one of the most improved players in the country. And I think he's going to give teams a lot of problems. A lot of problems. So I got Alabama at 8, just running through their schedule. Their first 3 games, Western Kentucky, USF, at Wisconsin. I think they win all 3. Georgia at home. I think it's possible that they beat Georgia here. They have been the thorn in their side. At Vanderbilt, I think that's a win. South Carolina, that's a win. At Tennessee could be problematic. I think that could be a problematic game. Missouri at home could be problematic, right? Then they have a bye at LSU. People are high on LSU. I don't think they're very good. I think their defense stinks. Mercer, they're going to win that game. At Oklahoma, I think that's a possible loss. Auburn at home. I think Alabama loses 2 and misses the SEC championship game. But they're going to have a good enough schedule to make it into the playoff. And I think they will get the 8 spot. I realized I made a mistake here. And I'm going to add a team here and subtract a team that I completely forgot about. My number 9 team who will play Alabama is Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame makes the playoff as an at-large. I do think Notre Dame, I think they might be sweating on selection on the selection show because Notre Dame, I think a lot of people just kind of assume that Notre Dame's going to be a world beater in everything. But I think if you look at the schedule and if you think about their roster, I just don't think that I don't think they're going to run the table. I don't think they're going to be good enough to just, have a 12-0 schedule, to be this, this dominant force. I don't think that's who they're going to be. So you look at their schedule. Oh, I thought I had it pulled up here. Hold on for a minute. Oh, here we go. They start with Texas A&M, and I think I think a lot of people would say that's going to be an easy win for them. Maybe. It's at Kyle Field. I think Mike Elko's a heck of a coach. That could be a trouble spot for them. Northern Illinois at home. Then they go to Purdue. That's a tricky game. Like, I'm not picking Purdue to win that, but that's a tricky game. They get Miami of Ohio, Louisville, Stanford. Those should be wins. At Georgia Tech, that should be a win. Versus Navy, that should be a win. But then Florida State at USC, I think those are tough games. Listen, if Notre Dame loses even one, they're going to lose the schedule argument. They're going to lose the schedule argument. Like, their strength of schedule is not great. At the same time, I think there are multiple losable games on here. So I think they slot in below Alabama because I think they lose at least one, maybe even two, but I think they will have enough cachet to get the 9 spot. My number 10 seed is Mizzou. And I think very similarly, I think Missouri loses a couple games, but I think I think they'll get enough cred with the schedule because they're in the SEC, but I don't think they're going to get a high seed despite maybe having a better record than say Oregon or Michigan, because again, the schedule is weak for them. They have a couple of key games, but I think with that schedule, I think they end up 10-2, maybe even 11-1. I like them to go. I like them to go. I like them to be the 10 spot. Sorry, I am my brain is not working as fast as my mouth, so I apologize. My 11 seed is a team that I did not think I would have in, but I think based on what I'm thinking through with the Big 12 and the ACC and the SEC, I don't think there's going to be a 5th SEC team in. I think Oklahoma is going to have too many losses. I think Tennessee is going to have too many losses. I think Ole Miss is overrated, and I think they're going to have too many losses. Like, I know they have a lot of starters coming back. I just don't think they're as good as people think they are. I think they are going to struggle this year. I look at the Big 12. I look at the ACC. And I'm like, I have a couple of dark horses. One team to watch out for is SMU. But even like their schedule is pretty doable. At the end of the day, the team I went with for the 11th spot, despite me saying that I don't think they're going to get in, is Iowa. Because I think they're going to go 10-2, and I think they are going to have enough, even with their weak schedule. I think they're going to have wins against Nebraska and Wisconsin, which I think are going to matter. I think their loss to Ohio State is not going to be a knock against them because I think they are going to be the number 2 seed in all of college football. And so I've got Iowa squeaking in, and I've got my 12 seed as Boise State, the group of 5 participant. I think teams like a team like Liberty might go undefeated. I just don't think you're going to be able to ignore what Boise State accomplishes in their schedule. They play Washington State, they play Oregon State. And even though I don't think either of those teams are very good, I still think people will see those names and say, oh, Power 5. They play Oregon. And I think how they hold up against Oregon will matter as well. So that's my playoff. I got Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Florida State 3, Utah 4, Texas 5, Michigan 6, Oregon 7, Alabama 8, Notre Dame 9, Missouri 10, Iowa 11, Boise State 12. That would mean Texas, Boise State as the 5-12, Michigan, Iowa as the 6-11, Oregon, Missouri as the 7-10. That would be my favorite game of the whole first round. And then Alabama, Notre Dame as the 8-9 game. How I would think that goes, I think it's probably all chalk. Texas, Michigan, Oregon, Alabama. I think they probably sweep. And then it would be Georgia, Alabama rematch. I think Georgia takes that one. Ohio State, Oregon rematch. I think the Buckeyes would get that done. Florida State, Michigan. I'd pick Michigan over Florida State. Utah, Texas. I would have Texas over Utah. And then you'd have Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State, Michigan. So you get Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia, Texas, maybe 3 times each, which would be amazing. I would pick Georgia, Ohio State. I'm doing this against my better judgment as a Buckeye fan. I would pick Ohio State over Georgia at this point. When it's all said and done. Maybe that's me being a homer. Although to be fair, I really don't want to pick that because every time I pick Ohio State to win the national championship, they don't. But I think just based on what I'm seeing, what I'm reading, what I'm hearing, that would be what I have. So we could get a lot of rematches in the playoff, and I would not be surprised by that. So those are my playoff predictions. Let me talk about Heisman for a minute. I think the Arizona quarterback, I think it's Noah Fatitfa. I think he's a dark horse. I think he could have a great year. But my 4 that I have right now, Riley Leonard's another dark horse for Notre Dame. Jalen Milroe, I don't even think he's a dark horse. I think he's a favorite. I don't have him in my top 4 though. Here's the top 4 that I have. I think Carson Beck wins it out of Georgia. I think he's going to have a lot of highlight games, and I think he is the face of that team, which is difficult for Ohio. Like I wanted to pick an Ohio State guy, and I have one in my top 4, but the reality is no one guy is going to be the face. Like Will Howard, I think is going to be brought down because of all the talent around him. Like I don't think DJ Uiagalelei is going to get enough run at Florida State. I don't think I don't think there's enough on the other teams. I think Carson Beck is the unquestioned guy. He's going to have every snap. So he's my winner. The other 3 guys I have making it to New York, Dylan Gabriel, quarterback out of Oregon. I think 2 losses will knock him out, but I think he'll have stats that might make voters really question whether they should vote for him over Beck. I think Emeka Egbuka is going to have a phenomenal year. I think the way Chip Kelly is talking about using him, I think he's going to have some rushing touchdowns. I think he's going to have a lot of receiving touchdowns. I think they're going to use him in the slot, which is where they love to throw. And I think that's going to be Will Howard's best friend as he throws the ball. And I think Quinn Ewers, being the quarterback at Texas and name recognition, I think he gets an invite to New York as well. But I've got Carson Beck winning it. Let me go to who I think coach of the year will be in the Big Ten, offensive player and defensive player in the Big Ten will be. And we talked about this at the Big Ten huddle. So if you already watched this, you're not going to be surprised by who I say. Freshman of the year, I think a lot of people will pick Jeremiah Smith for Ohio State. I do not have Jeremiah Smith. I have him second. And part of the reason why is I think I don't think he'll have the volume as my winner, which is Dylan Raiola. I think Dylan Raiola, quarterback out of Nebraska, is the freshman of the year. I think he leads Nebraska to 8 or 9 wins. And because of that, I think that's going to make him a huge, an overwhelming recipient. Like I think it'll be a landslide because A, Nebraska gets to a bowl game. B, he's in major games, and I think he's going to flash. And C, he has the volume. Whereas even Jeremiah Smith, who is going to be a starter for Ohio State, he's not going to have the same amount of market share or target share as Dylan Raiola does, because Dylan Raiola is going to touch the ball every single play. So I think those are easily the top 2. I think Raiola is number 1. A few other guys to watch out for. Coy Parrish out of Minnesota, I think could have a huge impact. Jordan Marshall out of Michigan. running back, guys from out of the blue, Andy and Jared were really high on him, and there's a lot of buzz coming out of him out of camp. Elijah Rushing as a 5-star defensive end for Oregon. Those are guys I would be watching out for. In terms of defensive player of the year, I'm going in a little bit of a different direction because I think this guy is going to have maybe a record-breaking year for Penn State, and that's Abdul Carter. If you look at the Defensive Player of the Year award, it's often safeties, linebackers, or edge rushers. So defensive tackle, I think Mason Graham might be the best player in the country. He's not going to have the stats to win this award. I just don't think he's going to flash enough. Not because he's not great, but he's going to be so good at taking on double teams and letting Josiah Stewart get sacks and letting other guys get sacks. Same is true with Kenneth Grant. Like I think they're great. I just don't think that he's going to have the volume of stats. Abdul Carter is going to get his, and he's going to eat. And I think there's going to be games where even if they lose, he might have 2 or 3 sacks. Think about games like USC and Ohio State, where he's unblockable. And it's like, oh, the reason why they were even in that game was because of Abdul Carter. So I think Abdul Carter ends up winning Defensive Player of the Year because of his stats. I think Caleb Downs, Will Johnson, Jabbar Muhammad out of Oregon. I didn't have him originally on my list, but I think Dylan Thieneman is probably a potential name on there as well. I thought JR on the Big Ten Huddle made a good point that he already has name recognition, and even if Purdue has a bad season, if he has a really good breakout season again, that could be a savvy pick by veteran journalists to pick him as the Defensive Player of the Year. Jay Higgins out of Iowa, I think, is another guy to watch out for, especially if they make a playoff run. Offensive Player of the Year, I think it's Dylan Gabriel, and I think he wins it. And then I think a distant second, which might expose how I think the Heisman voting is going to go, is Emeka Egbuka. Egbuka, wide receivers don't get a lot of pub, but again, I think Egbuka is going to get a lot of touches. I think he's going to get a lot of touchdowns, and I think he is the well-known commodity on this Ohio State offense as the heir apparent to Marvin Harrison, and I think he will overshadow Jeremiah Smith. So I think Smith's going to get a lot of hype. I think Carnell Tate's going to get a lot of hype, but I think Emeka is going to be the leading receiver. I think he's going to have a lot of touches, a lot of highlight plays, especially in the big spotlight games. And that's going to make him, I think, the number two guy in this race. Other guys to watch out for: Miller Moss out of USC, Drew Aller out of Penn State, Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. Watch out for him. I think those guys, I think, are some other big names. And of course, Tez Johnson out of Oregon. I think he could be a player in this race, but I think he's going to share too much with Dylan Gabriel. Dark horse, maybe Jonah Coleman out of Washington. If Washington has a good year, I think he's going to be a big part of that. So watch out for him. And then coach of the year. Who do I think is going to be the coach of the year in the Big Ten? I think if things go the way I think they go, if Nebraska gets 9 wins, I think Matt Rule is the slam dunk Big Ten Coach of the Year. I think that might be true even if Dan Lanning goes 12-0. I think that might be true with one exception, but I think that'll be true even if Indiana goes like 7-5. I think that'll be true if Ryan Day goes 12-0 and beats everyone by 35 points. I think that's true even if Luke Fickell goes 9-3. I just think people are waiting for Nebraska to get back to being Nebraska. And I think if they're 9-3, I think if they have an upset or two along the way, I think that's going to match the hype of Matt Rule. And I think people will say, yes, he is absolutely the coach of the year. The one exception, and JR made this point on our show on Tuesday night. If Rutgers gets to 10-2, it is going to be really hard to not give it to Greg Schiano. So I think that's the one scenario where Matt Rule might have to split it or he might lose it if he gets to 9-3 is if Rutgers gets to 10-2. And even then, I think it might be a split. But that would be my coach of the year pick right now is Matt Rule. I think people are expecting that they'll go 9-3. And at the same time, I think they will be surprised if they go 9-3 because, well, Nebraska has been saying they're going to be 9-3 or are going to do well for the past 8 years. So when's it going to happen? And so I think that's gonna drum up a lot of support for what Matt Rule has done and what he will continue to do. So I think he's the coach of the year, my preseason coach of the year. That'll do it. I talked very quickly on this podcast, so I apologize. There is a transcript. I don't know how helpful it is, but if you go on Spotify, there's a transcript of this podcast if you want to read it. But again, make sure to like and follow on Spotify and make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Let's get this thing to 300 before the official start of the college football season. That's August 31st. And we will be back with picks. We'll do the state of the Trojans on Monday, and then we will have week 1 picks, I believe, with my man Larry Crane from Night Watch. You won't want to miss it. Take care. Enjoy the start of the football season, and God bless.